welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to the 30-day challenge. I'm really sorry about this, but I am working with an injury over the next few days. So what I can lead you through is a little bit limited, just because I have to protect my back. So we'll move through a couple of exercises in the next few days that will be a little bit more targeted. There'll be shorter classes, but I've actually been told to avoid stretching a lot into my spine because, not to get super into it, but what's happening is my muscles are retracting more than they were before. So when I stretch into it, it actually makes what's happening in my back worse. So with that being said, I will be moving carefully, and this is something worth addressing with yoga, and something that I have noticed, especially as I've gotten older, that really working on the strengthening the body is so much more important than the flexibility. I think we tend in this practice to put a lot of focus and glamour on the flexibility because it can look really beautiful, but the strength is really important. So these days I actually, my yoga practice is a lot different because I do actually also use weights and resistance bands, and I do a lot of strength training outside of my yoga practice. However, unfortunately, I have some imbalances that I am working with right now, and just to make sure that I don't hurt myself anymore or make the situation worse, I'm going to be really careful the next few days, which is kind of a bummer because this is the end of our challenge and I'd really like to do some super fun stuff with you, but I don't know, this is yoga, right? Listening to your body and moving forward, and hopefully I can do another 30-day challenge in October or maybe November, and we can do some more advanced stuff. So anyway, thanks for hanging in these last few days, and yeah, I will still be giving you videos, but they will be short and they'll probably be strength training because that's what I'm working on right now. So I hope you enjoy it. If not, there's plenty of other videos up on the channel that you can replace if what I'm giving you this next week due to my injury isn't working for you. Okay, so today we're going to just work really simply on how to set up downward facing dog. So a lot of people don't feel good in their downward facing dog, and I have another video about downward facing dog because it is one of my favorite poses, but it is something that a lot of people, especially when they first start practicing yoga, don't feel great in. And so I want to talk to you first about your shoulders, what your shoulders should be doing. So first of all, whenever we have weight bearing on our hands, we want the fingers spread really, really wide. So the fingers should be super spread. And what you want to look for, a lot of people talk about like the rotation of the hand, whether you should have the index finger forward or the middle finger or somewhere in between. Actually, what you want is for this line of your wrist, this crease here, to be parallel to the front side of your mat. So whatever that means about the rotation of the hand, it's really not important. You want this to be parallel to the front side of the mat anytime there's weight bearing on the hands. So even here in a tabletop position, you want this line parallel to the front of the mat because this is also weight bearing on your hands. Same thing for plank. Anytime the hands are down, you want the fingers spread really wide and the wrist pointing forward. What this does is activate these muscles along the wrist, and it keeps you from dumping down into the joint. When your hand is relaxed, these muscles aren't working, and this is a huge cause of wrist pain in yoga. So starting with the hands, this is what we want. And then into the shoulders. So the best way to show this to you is for you to look at my upper back in just a moment here. But you have the option of rotating the elbows out, right? And your elbows rotate in. And you can do this without moving the hands too much. You have this rotation. So you can just practice this a little bit and get familiar with what this is. And as you're doing this, notice what happens in the shoulder blades. So your shoulder blades, depending on, much like your pelvis, so with the pelvis, depending on how you rotate the feet out or in, the pelvic joint moves, right? So when the toes are pointed in, you're actually creating space in the sacral joint because the joint opens up like this. When you have the toes pointing out, like think of ballerina feet, you have pressure on that sacral joint because you're actually rotating the legs so that the hips come in, right? Same thing with the shoulders. So you can actually see here, if you look at my upper back, right? If I rotate the elbows out, my shoulders crunch in towards each other. I don't have very much room, and now I feel a lot of pressure on my shoulders. I don't feel like any weight in my hands, my arms aren't really working. It's all in my shoulders here. Now, if I take those elbows and I rotate so that the elbow's pointing straight back, do you see how much space I just created across here? It's so much more open. And now I actually feel the weight distributed from my hands to my shoulders. Nothing's taking too much of the burden. And so this is what we want in downward dog. And this is why when you first start practicing yoga, you really end up with this, it's like a half plank, half down dog. And it looks something like this. And as a teacher, I see this a lot in newer students. It looks so uncomfortable. And it's a really easy fix. You just rotate the elbows back, and then there's so much more room to lengthen through the spine. So, from the hands up so far, fingers spread wide, crease of the wrist pointing towards the front of the mat, and then you're wrapping the arms in, which you've probably heard this cue a million times in a yoga class. If you've been taking it for a while, wrap the arms in. And what that means is you're rotating the arms internally so that the elbows point back. And you want the eye of the elbow here facing forward. Of course, when you actually put weight on it, it's gonna move more like this just because you have weight on it, correct? And then as far as the distance between the hands and the feet, it's really nice to get your heels down because we often cue heels to the ground, right? But that's not really important here. What you want is length through the spine. So you want to think that between the tips of the fingers here and the height of the hips, you're making the longest diagonal you possibly could with the spine. And in order to do that, you need space. So instead of heels to the ground, think of lengthening. Really use, our mats are pretty long, so think of using the entire space of the mat. And then a way to measure the distance here is to pull forward to a plank, and you should not have to adjust. You should pull straight forward and then back. So actually I could probably be like a tiny bit longer. But do you see how much more length there is through the spine when you do that? And then you pull forward to a plank and you're already there. And back. So this is how ideally we set up the downward dog. And it's really confusing because as yoga teachers, we give a lot of different, we give a lot of cues that are kind of like red herrings. We tell you, to bring your heels towards the ground and your hips towards the sky, which what we really want is your hips as far away from your fingertips as you can press them. And yes, you want the heels reaching towards the floor because you want to stretch through the back of the leg. So the last thing we'll go over here is just what are you doing with the legs here? Because the legs are also super active. Downward facing dog is It's such an amazing pose because the whole body's working. The core is engaged. The entire posterior chain of the body is active. The back of the body, from the shoulders to low back, everything is engaged in this pose. And it's your basis for a handstand. So if your goal is something much more glamorous than downward facing dog, mastering downward facing dog is how you get there. So, reviewing, fingers spread wide, wrist pointing so that the wrist crease is parallel to the front of the mat. You'll tuck the toes. Elbows are wrapping so that the elbow is pointing back, almost like you have for chaturanga arms. Tuck the toes, lift the hips, and then walk your feet away so that you have a lot of length. Check. Make sure you can come forward to a plank. Come back. And then with the legs. So you want the toes facing forward, about hip distance apart. And then the same thing you're doing with the arms. You want to wrap the legs. So think almost as if you were pulling the heels a little bit further in towards each other, but we're not actually going to do that. But you want to have that rotation in the legs. So you can move the heels slowly, splay them slightly out and feel that. You want the opposite of that. So pull it in, and that's what you want. And you should really feel it active through the inner thighs, pulling the knees up so that the quads are engaged, and then pressing the chest back, lengthening through the fingertips. Whole body is engaged. The elbows are pulling back. Your head is relaxed. And hopefully this feels a whole lot better than your downward dog has been feeling. I hope I was able to help you a little bit here. And once again, I'm really sorry for the format of this video. I know it's a little bit more workshop style. And I will look at what needs to be done as far as the next few videos, so I can give you something a little bit more class-like tomorrow. But I appreciate if you did watch this video, and I really hope you got something out of it. And I'll see you on your mat tomorrow for a little bit more movement, but I would expect some strength training. So bring your muscles, and thank you so much.